Yes. Well, you mentioned that you have become increasingly interested in shifting attention from the international level to the local level. Could you tell us some about why that is?
Well, I began working on climate change in 1988, and actually the U.S. government was far more receptive to doing something then than they have been in the intervening years, or certainly than they are now. As many of your listeners may know, President Bush pulled the U.S. out of the only international agreement to actually call upon countries to reduce their emissions.
And that was Kyoto.
That's called
agreement.
the Kyoto Protocol, an agreement which is really an amendment to an earlier agreement that his father signed and had ratified by the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate ratified it unanimously, and it said, look, we've got a serious problem.
So we were already acknowledging it. We were already on the road to doing something about it.
We have a serious problem. We recognize that industrial countries like the U.S. are the main contributors to the greenhouse gases, to the heat-trapping gases. And we know that developing countries are going to need some help. And they will join in once industrial countries demonstrate how to do it. Well, as soon as we got to the point that said industrial countries start doing it, we pulled out. And so we and Russia and Australia are the only major holdouts among the industrial countries. And for that reason, it has not officially gone into force as a treaty.
And even if it were to go into force, it's just, I mean, it's not a drop in the bucket, but it's not a significant enough measure to really do what's needed. It's like what, 5 point something or 8%? 5%
of industrial countries' emissions will be reduced by the roughly 2010.
And it's just in a narrow window of a period. It's between 2008 and 2012.
Right.
So it's not even an ongoing, it's not like, it's not as though that is reducing enough, and it's not as though that's setting us on a course to continue.
It's supposed to be the first step, and then starting in 2005, we're supposed to begin renegotiating the next step.
So to be thinking of it as this huge, overwhelming thing is really kind of ridiculous, since it was probably a compromise in the first place. And even the city of Cambridge has set a goal that's at least, what, instead of 5%, it's 20%, so that's four times as large.
Yes.
And many companies have reduced 80–90% already.
Many companies have done far more than any countries have done, which is kind of an irony. And a number of universities have also made commitments. I think Tufts was probably the first back in 1999 when President DiBiagio pledged that Tufts would either meet or beat the Kyoto target, whether it was ratified or not by the U.S.
That's great.
And now there are over 450 colleges and universities in the U.S. that have some kind of a climate action plan. So that's, you know, it's just kind of, it's just one of these things that people look at this and they say, well, this is crazy not to be addressing this problem.
So businesses are saying, and communities and schools are saying, this is important. It's not rocket science.
Yes.
We can do it as a matter of course in the course of our daily activities, and cities, and they're going ahead and doing it.
That's right.
And you've been in this international arena. You noted the U.S. is not actively participating in this way. And where has that, where are you focusing your attention?
Let me just say, I still do a lot of international work, and it's not very pleasant being an American dealing with climate change in other countries. We are viewed as a real outlier and a real sort of traitor to the planet.
Are we viewed as an obstacle?
Absolutely.
So a real kind of renegade outlaw.
Remember this, that when it comes to climate-altering gas emissions, the U.S. is #1. We have less than 5% of the world's population. We're producing 25% of the emissions.
So to by ourselves, we're a quarter of the emissions.
Quarter of the global
emissions. We're really not stepping up to the plate.
And we're not stepping up
as a nation. We are as communities.
That's right.
Towns. Okay.
And that's what's interesting is how communities have picked this up. And in fact, next week I'm supposed to meet a delegation from Switzerland who is coming here to find out why is it that everything is being done in the U.S. in the Northeast. Why isn't anything happening in Washington, but why are things happening here in the Northeast? Because New Hampshire has passed some really interesting legislation, Massachusetts has, Vermont is doing interesting, important things, Connecticut is aboard. And what's fascinating is we have 6 governors, and some are Democrats and some are Republicans. At one point, the main governor was an independent. They've all signed on. So it's a very interesting political dynamic here in the Northeast, in New England.
So, and I think what you might be referring to too is the way the Northeast governors and the Eastern Canadian premiers are participating and have been dialoguing together to try to address climate change regionally.
That's right.
And even are all working together, I think, on a kind of potentially cap and trade program.
And working, Governor Pataki of New York has proposed a very strong goal, and New Jersey actually has a very strong goal that they're in the process of meeting. And the state of Pennsylvania, which is a coal state for heaven's sakes, is moving in this direction. So it could be that we have this whole area whose, you say, well, how much is that? Well, if you add that to the 5 Eastern Canadian provinces, it's a total amount of emissions that are equivalent to probably Germany and the United Kingdom combined.
Well, that's really exciting that the Northeast is taking that leadership. The way I think of California as having done that in some ways in terms of vehicles and actually, you know, helping to shape some of those standards for the automotive industry, it seems the Northeast is really doing that for climate change and for energy and hopefully even for renewables in terms of industrial potential here.
Well, one of the things about virtually all the steps that can be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is that they have multiple benefits.
Right.
And that also makes it even more puzzling that the federal government doesn't jump on board. But, you know, in terms of saving money, in terms of reducing dependency on foreign oil, in terms of cleaner air and you know, reduction in things like asthma and other things. I mean,
so you have something that's healthy, that's profitable, that creates jobs.
There's something wrong there. It's too good for us, so we're not doing it.
Right. So in a way, it seems like a total no-brainer, but yet, you know, the federal government's not taking action.
I guess that's the nature of the U.S. federal government. In some ways, is it tends to be a slight laggard. In terms of policy, it waits sometimes for cities or states to form policy, but also in that democratic way, some people might have more vested interests in the coal or the automotive or the electric utility.
No, that's right, and I think what's happening, and what I see happening, is it's communities, it's universities. I know that there are several church and synagogue and faith-based groups that are moving very aggressively to do things about climate change.
Really? Now, I'd heard there were faith-based groups acting on behalf of the environment at large. I didn't realize specifically about climate.
Really focusing on climate is an important issue.
So what are they doing? Are they passing out light bulbs in the congregations there?
Okay. Yeah, and they're looking at the facilities themselves. Churches and synagogues tend to be real energy hogs. You know, just by the nature of the structures.
It's a big open space.
Right, not much used often. Yeah, so they're looking at their facilities and what they can do in terms of energy retrofits, but they're also looking at what members of congregations can do themselves in terms of energy conservation at home, that sort of thing. So that's definitely a powerful sort of movement that's going on in a lot of churches.
And one of the other things, we can't do it in the eastern part of the state yet, but in the western part of the state, you can now, starting this month, sign up for green electricity.
Okay.
Meaning that it has low or zero carbon dioxide emissions.
So do you pay extra?
You pay a bit extra.
And then they'll generate it from renewable wind or solar or
That's right.
nuclear?
Or no
nuclear. Good.
It's hydropower.
Hydropower.
It's landfill gas. It's a mix of things, and they have to tell you up front what you're getting. And you actually, in the Berkshires and Hampshire County and so forth, I think you have a choice of two or three different plans. So if you prefer more wind or more solar or more something, you can vote with your 2 cents a kilowatt hour on which one you're going to do. And one of the things that some of the church and synagogue groups are doing is they're trying to aggregate their congregations to be buyers. So it's not only the building itself, it's also the members say, okay, we have 100 members, 100 households, and they've all agreed that they are willing to buy the green electricity. Well, for the utility, that's great, because then they've just gotten 100 customers. They didn't have to go out and market them to death.
No sales expenses.
No sales expenses, no promotions, and all of a sudden we're going to be generating more wind, more solar, more renewables.